Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Project Hades, which is the brand new Shader Decompiler Rewrite, which was released by the Yuzu team in the last week or so and is now in active testing in their early access branch. This rewrite, just like their previous texture and buffer cache rewrites, significantly improves GPU emulation, though to be honest, I would say that this update eclipses any previous update, and I literally mean that. The changes introduced by this new decompiler have fixed literally dozens upon dozens of your favorite Nintendo Switch games. This video is going to look at exactly what was fixed and what you can expect from these new changes. Now, before I get started, while I wanted to include every single game that I know of which was improved by these changes in this video, realistically, I was not able to do that. When I was recording this video, I literally had 14 hours of gameplay footage from so many games that had changed, and like I said, realistically, I had to cut that down into a list of games which, one, you guys have requested literally over the past 3 years of this emulator's life cycle, and two, the stuff which I've been asked to cover both on my Discord and also over on the Yuzu Discord server itself. There are also just some general things you should know about this new decompiler update. What it basically does for this emulator is it drastically improves game compatibility, Vulkan, OpenGL and Assembly Shaders stability, while also adding a disk shader cache for the Vulkan API, something I know that a lot of you have been requesting for a very long time. Now that I have all that info out of the way, let's jump straight into it and take a look at some games. To kick things off, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is now fully playable on Yuzu Emulator. All of this game's crashes, softlocks and shader related issues have been solved on Yuzu's brand new shader decompiler. In the top right hand corner of this video, you can see the specs of the PC I used for this gameplay footage and all the gameplay footage you're going to see throughout this video. I'm using a Ryzen 5 3600 which is clocked at 4.5 GHz. I also did some testing on an Intel i5 11500 using either of these CPUs. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is fully playable and ran mostly at full speed at all times in gameplay. Next up, we have yet another game which has been plagued with shader related crashes on Yuzu Emulator literally since the day it released. However, I'm happy to say that Fire Emblem Three Houses has now seen all of these issues completely fixed. It is now, from start to finish, 100% playable. In the gameplay footage you're watching now, you may also have noticed that they have completely fixed all of this game's rendering issues, that is, at least on Nvidia and Intel GPUs, and by looking at this before versus after comparison, you can see just how much Fire Emblem Three Houses has improved. Now, as I said, these changes do make this game perfectly rendered on Intel and Nvidia GPUs. However, there is still one render bug on AMD GPUs centered around small flickering squares from time to time in gameplay. This, at least at time of making this video, is not fixed, though hopefully it will be in the very near future, either by the Yuzu team on an update or by AMD via a new driver release. Next up on our long list of games which have been fixed in this new project release is Luigi's Mansion 3. By correctly implementing tessellation shaders, they have completely fixed all of the missing rendering floors like the sand in tomb suites, the floor, ground, chair and aisles in the grand stage area, as well as practically every single other area that was previously missing any surfaces being rendered in previous versions. On top of this fix to tessellation shaders, they have also completely fixed all of the strange blacked out graphics that occur when moving from room to room. There has literally never been a better time to play Luigi's Mansion 3 on this emulator, though please be aware that this game does still require the use of its Disable Dynamic Resolution mod. You'll find a link to that mod down in this video's description. Yet another game that has seen enormous rendering and game playability improvements is Mario Party 10. This title, as with literally dozens upon dozens of others, has gone from a non-rendered black screen to perfectly rendered and fully playable, even on a very moderate spec, and thanks to basically perfect controller and motion emulation, all game modes are going to be playable on compatible controllers. Yet another game that was previously rendered completely black, not rendering any graphics at all, is Clubhouse Games. This title, as with Mario Party, is also now considered perfectly rendered and fully playable in all game modes. So basically what you've seen for the past few games is going to be a continuing trend for most of this video. There are a literal butt ton of games which were previously not rendered at all, which are now rendering basically perfectly and considered fully playable on this new update. Catherine Full Body is yet another one of these titles. However, there is a workaround you may need to do to avoid a GPU race condition which can corrupt textures in gameplay. If you do encounter this texture corruption issue, you'll find that workaround, which I found down in this video's description. Kirby Star Allies is our next game to take a look at, and if you played this game in the past, you'll notice that they have now completely fixed the world map or stage selection screen, while also greatly boosting performance and visual rendering in gameplay. On top of these performance and rendering improvements, several audio emulation improvements have also brought this game much closer to perfect emulation. These audio changes can already be found in the latest mainline builds. However, as I said, these rendering changes given to us by the new Shader Decompiler are currently only in Yuzu's early access builds. Okay, so next up we're going to take a look at a literal ton of Unreal Engine 3 and Unreal Engine 4 games. Most of these either didn't render before or were rendered really poorly and are now close to or perfectly rendered. The first of these titles is Yoshi's Crafted World, and as is fairly apparent, this title has had almost all of its rendering issues completely fixed. This title no longer exhibits strange, blown out white screens when swapping from level to level. It no longer has horrible vertex explosions, at least when using the high GPU preset, and while using the Vulkan API, performance and stability has literally never been better. If I pressed Ctrl+U on my keyboard to unlock the frame rate right now, I'd be running at close to 200 frames per second. Next up, we have Bravely Default 2, yet another title that was previously not rendered at all, which is now basically perfectly rendered on the Vulkan API. It should be noted that on OpenGL, this game does have some rendering issues in relation to, I believe, texture binding problems, though to be honest, with Vulkan rendering as well as it does, you should probably just be playing it on that API anyway. Continuing with our Unreal Engine 4 games, we now have Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. This title, as with the previous one, is rendering very well compared to how it used to render, being a black screen and all. However, this title does still have some GPU issues in relation to mipmap rendering. As you'll see from time to time throughout this short gameplay section, the game does seem to have some strange graphical corruptions on some textures, like on Crash Bandicoot himself or on these boxes, but to be honest, I would have to consider this game playable from start to finish, since I myself have actually played the entire game from start to finish. Next up, we have, surprise, yet another Unreal Engine game, this time with Daemon X Machina. They have once again made this game go from a non-rendered black screen mess to basically perfectly rendered at all times in gameplay on all APIs within the emulator. I believe this game already has a port to PC or a PC version of its own, but regardless, it's still really nice to see games like this get improved. More game compatibility on an emulator is always a good thing in my book. Speaking of games that already have PC versions and that you may or may not care about, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is yet another Unreal Engine title which has seen significant improvements to rendering and performance thanks to this new Shader Decompiler release. This, as with other Unreal Engine games, was a horribly broken and vertex exploded mess before this, and while it's not perfectly rendered now, it is much better, although as with Crash Bandicoot 4, it does still have some texture and mipmap issues. Yet another Unreal Engine game which surprisingly a lot of people have asked me to cover in this new update is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remastered for Nintendo Switch. This game, as with all of the previous Unreal Engine games, is now rendering, I'm not going to say perfectly, but very close to perfectly, and also runs at basically full speed close to all the time on the system I used for testing in this video. Like I said, there are literally dozens upon dozens of new games rendering basically perfectly on this new update, and there are just 2 final Unreal Engine games I want to take a look at in this section. These are games you guys have asked me to look at, the first of those being Spyro the Reignited Trilogy, which as you can see is rendering very close to perfectly on Vulkan. It does have some weird flickery shadow issues from time to time, but after like 4 hours of playtesting I didn't encounter any issues apart from the shadows, and the game is just very functional. The last Unreal Engine game I want to take a look at is Trials of Mana, which similarly to Spyro and Crash 4 does have some weird shadow and texture issues, but otherwise I would say that this game is in a very playable state. Okay, so onto some other games you guys have highly requested. We're going to take a look at some of these Xenoblade Chronicles titles, starting things off with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which on this brand new Hades Decompiler update has seen some huge graphical improvements. For this one, we're going to have to do some before versus after comparisons because it's really hard to explain exactly what was fixed. Previously, you can see these weird black boxes that happen in the center of the screen and in the very top left hand corner of our screen. These were, I guess, shader issues, since on this new Shader Decompiler, they have been completely removed from the game, and basically 99% of graphical issues present in Xenoblade titles have now been fixed. This translates not only to Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but also to Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Not only have these strange boxes been fixed, but also strange shader errors like you can see on the path here have also been fixed on this new decompiler. This is going to come as awesome news for anybody who wants to play Xenoblade Chronicles titles on Yuzu Emulator, since in recent weeks they've not only greatly improved these games' performance, fixed basically all of their rendering problems, but also solved pretty much all of their audio and softlock issues, meaning that these games are for the most part fully playable while also running at full speed at all times, at least on a PC of similar spec to the ones I used for this demonstration. I could sit here all day and talk about how awesomely these games run, but there are still a lot of games to cover, so let's move swiftly along and take a look at our next one. This next title is called Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 The Black Order. This is a game that literally hundreds of you have asked me to test in previous months, and literally until right now, this game did not render a single thing in gameplay other than horribly broken vertex exploded graphics. Now, as you can see in the gameplay footage on screen, this game does have some strange slowdowns. From time to time it just drops seemingly for no reason down to like 22 FPS. I wouldn't say it makes the game unplayable, but it definitely is an oddity that should be noted for anybody trying to play it. You are also going to be required to use the Vulkan API in order to get the game to render as perfectly as it currently is for me in this demo. Persona 5 Strikers, or Persona 5 Scramble if you're in Japan, is yet another Koei Tecmo game which is working awesomely on this new decompiler update. At least in the few hours I've spent in playing this game thus far, I haven't encountered any crashing issues, graphical problems or such. So yeah, just yet another game to add to the already massive lists of games fixed by these new changes. It's also not just rendering improvements we've seen on this new decompiler. We also have seen a dramatic improvement not only to performance but also to the stability of the Vulkan API. Performance improvements can be seen here in Super Mario Odyssey, where it's not only rendered better but also running much better on Vulkan, and also seen here in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where it not only renders basically perfectly, at least on my Nvidia GPU, but also runs 15 to 25 frames per second faster scene dependent. Staying on the topic of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on Vulkan, not only is it rendered and running much better, but rune interactions have also been fixed on the new decompiler. Last but certainly not least, what I want to take a look at is the incredible improvements to Vulkan shader caching speed given to us by this brand new shader decompiler. This is legitimately one of the best things that has been given to us by this new update. Let's do a little demonstration with one of the most shader heavy games on this emulator, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This little demonstration is fairly self-explanatory. On the left of our screen we have the old shader decompiler and shader caching speed, and on the right we have the new shader decompiler and shader caching speed. Already you can see just how much faster it is at caching shaders, meaning that 1, you're going to spend less time building shaders in gameplay, and 2, your gameplay while caching shaders is going to be infinitely more smooth. On the left, on the old decompiler, you can see we're getting constant shader caching stutters, and on the right, after about 25 seconds, you can see that we're already basically running at 60 frames per second for the most part, with almost imperceptible stutters when we are building and caching our shaders. As I said at the start of this video, this new decompiler also adds a Vulkan disk shader cache meaning that you can not only build your shaders super fast from the very start of gameplay, but the emulator now also saves those shaders to a disk for loading in future gameplay sessions. You're probably already sick of me saying this, but as I've said before, I could literally sit here for another 2 or 3 hours listing off new games and things improved by this decompiler. It is literally one of the most single impressive emulator releases for game compatibility, performance and stability I've seen from any emulator in quite some time. The gameplay you're watching right now is in fact of Monster Hunter Rise running on this new update, while Monster Hunter Rise being fixed wasn't entirely related to this new decompiler. It did greatly help in improving its performance and general stability. This game is now what I would call in a mostly playable state on Yuzu's latest builds, at least on the Vulkan API. There were also a lot of other smaller, more finite changes added to this emulator in the past few weeks that I've missed out on since I haven't really been uploading too many emulator videos as of late. I do plan to cover those in another shorter video that's not related to this shader decompiler. Hopefully I'll have that video finished up and released in the next 3 to 5 days, so keep your eyes peeled on the channel for that. For now at least, that's going to be it for this one. As always, if you have any questions on game compatibility or anything not covered in this video, don't be afraid to ask me down below or head on over to my Discord server, or indeed the Yuzu official Discord server, links to which you will find down in this video's description. Once again guys, thank you all very much for watching, I greatly appreciate it. As always, remember to like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see all future videos from me.